1 Samuel chapter 5 Introduction. The ark being captured by the Philistines now goes on a trip to the Philistine cities. In this chapter, the Philistines are pictured more as religious rivals than as political opponents. The Israelites carry the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh to their camp at Ebenezer and then into battle at Aphek, wherein Israel was defeated and the ark was carried off by the Philistines. The ark then moves directly west past Aphek to Ashdod, Gath, and onward to Ekron. Here we see the Philistines, a pagan people, treat the ark with reverence and awe. These pagans expected to be blessed by the possession of the ark. Instead, we see they were cursed. They try to incorporate it into their pantheon of gods. But the Lord of Israel will not be controlled by pagans either. He shows no man can own or manipulate God. His will be done, not ours. Ashdod. Ashdod is about 48 kilometers, that is 30 miles south of where they had their battle at Aphek. The Philistines believe that the spoils from the battle, which were the trophies of their success, belonged to the victorious God. Therefore, the Ark of the Covenant of Israel's God stood as a trophy in the temple of their god Dagon. Dagon was the god of the Philistines. He is pictured as part man and part fish. In fact, the word dag in Hebrew means fishy part. Dagon was said to be the father of Baal. This deity was a personification of the generative and life-giving principle of nature. The fish, with its innumerable multiplication, was especially adapted to set forth the idea of the giver of all earthly good. He was the god of grain and was responsible for a bountiful harvest. When the ark was placed in Dagon's temple, the Lord knocks the Dagon idol over during the night. The statue of Dagon was found prostrate before the ark, that is, in a posture of a slave before his master, which serves to indicate the towering power and majesty of the God of Israel. The idol is placed on its face, which is a position of worship. These idols are typically quite large, standing tens of feet in height. So, it was no small matter to find this idol on the ground. Philippians 2:10-11 says that one day everyone will bend down to Jesus. They will admit that He is the most powerful God. Everyone will give honor to Jesus. The Philistines are shocked to find their so-called God worshipping the God of Israel, and so they place it back in position. They wanted to believe it was an accident. So they took Dagon and set it in its place again. The next night, the Lord repeats the process again. Dagon was lying in front of the ark again. This was not an accident, as it happened twice. But this time, Dagon was broken. His head and hands were broken off and were lying on the threshold. This symbolizes the removal of the authority and power of this idol. This time, Dagon's head, suggestive of his sovereign control, and his hands, suggesting his power, broke off. 1 Samuel 5:4. In the ancient Near East, warring armies cut off and collected the heads and hands of their enemies to count accurately the number of their slain when they won the battle. 1 Samuel 29:4, Judges 8:6. The Philistines won the battle with the Israelites, But God showed the Philistines that he is more powerful than their god Dagon. The incident is alleged as the origin of the custom of leaping over the threshold of the temple rather than stepping on it. In fact, it was a religious usage of the ancient Near East which derived from the belief that spirits inhabited the threshold. From this point forward, the priests of this false god wouldn't dare enter into the temple of this idol, therefore leaving it empty. The people of Ashdod should have turned from worshipping Dagon and put their trust in God. Up to this point, the Lord has been understood to be working behind the scenes. At this point, we begin to see the Lord acting again in the narrative. Death followed because they chose to continue in unbelief in spite of their confession of God's superiority. The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod and its vicinity. He brought devastation on them and afflicted them with tumors. The Hebrew word translated afflicted of tumors occurs only here in the New Testament. The Septuagint translators interpreted it accurately as groin, which is the area between the abdomen and the upper thigh on either side of the body. These bubonic tumors were apparently most prominent in the groin area, and hence we have the English translation hemorrhoids or bleeding piles. This disease is often accompanied with tumors, dysentery, bloody flux, and ulcerated anus. It is characterized by a high mortality rate. Since the Philistines associated mice which carry this plague, 1 Samuel 6:4-5, it seems clear that the hand of God sent this particular affliction on them. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, evidently the rulers of Ashdod believed that it was particularly with this city that the Hebrew God felt displeasure. So they moved the ark to Gath. Instead of submitting to God of Israel, they decided to get rid of him. We can't get rid of God. We can do things to push him away, but even the best of those attempts are temporary. We must all face God and stand before him one day. Gath. From Ashdod, they moved the ark of God to Gath. Gath literally means wine press. It's about 12 miles southeast of Ashdod. It's the southernmost Philistine city. But after they had moved it, the Lord's hand was against that city also, throwing it into a great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, both young and old, with an outbreak of tumors. Very quickly, the citizens of Gath likewise find it difficult to sit down. Ekron. So then the ark is off again to Ekron. Ekron stood about 6 miles north of Gath. Even as the ark is being delivered to Ekron, the people are lamenting. They declared that it has come to kill them. In 1 Samuel 4:6-8, the Philistines remembered what the God of Israel did in the time of Moses. Now, God was again punishing them, they thought. Biblical Archaeology Review 16:1, 26-36 says that the reputation of the ark preceded the ark to Ekron, and its residents did not welcome it as a trophy of war. They instead saw it as a divine instrument of death. The illness in Ekron was like that of Gath and Ashdod, except that it was even more severe. The people in Ekron feared that everyone might be killed and so they prayed to the God in heaven instead of to their own gods. The outcry of the city went up to heaven. The cry then went up to heaven from Philistia recalls the death cry that went up to heaven earlier when Egypt was afflicted by God. Exodus 12:30. Summary. In this chapter, we saw how the Philistines repeatedly acknowledged God's superior power over themselves and Dagon. This is a testimony to God's sovereignty in this narrative. Through the 7 months that the ark was in Philistia, 1 Samuel 6:1, the Philistines learned what the Israelites had not. God is the sovereign God, yet they refused to bow before him. The Philistines, if they had repented and turned towards the Lord, could have benefited from the ark. Instead, it became a curse and a judgment to them. The same is true of the presence of God among men today, which can be a fragrance of life to some and the aroma of death to others. 2 Corinthians 2:15-16. 1 Samuel chapter 5 questions. 1 Samuel chapter 5 answers.